When a billionaire heiress in a wheelchair meets a janitor who promises the impossible, their collision will shatter everything they thought they knew about healing love and the courage to live again. Welcome to a story that will take you on an emotional roller coaster through the glittering towers of Manhattan to the deepest chambers of the human heart. Stay with me until the very end, and please comment which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this incredible journey reaches across the world. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ward Industries' 52nd floor, each droplet a tiny percussion in the symphony of Manhattan's chaos below. Tiffany Ward sat motionless in her custom titanium wheelchair, her fingers drumming an impatient rhythm against the armrest as she stared out at the city that had once bowed to her every whim. The irony wasn't lost on her. Who had once moved mountains with a single phone call now couldn't move her own legs. "Miss Ward, the board meeting is scheduled to begin in 10 minutes, her assistant Margaret announced from the doorway, her voice carefully modulated to that professional tone everyone used around her now. Not the warm familiarity of before, but something colder, more cautious. Pity disguised as respect. Tiffany didn't turn around. She couldn't bear to see another pair of eyes trying so hard not to look at the wheelchair, not to acknowledge the elephant in the room that had become her constant companion for the past 18 months. "Tell them I'll be there shortly." "Yes, ma'am." The click of Margaret's heels retreated down the marble hallway, leaving Tiffany alone with her reflection in the rain-streaked glass. At 28, she should have been in her prime, beautiful, powerful, unstoppable. Instead, she was trapped in a body that had betrayed her, ruling an empire from a throne of titanium and broken dreams. The accident had been swift and merciless. One moment she was driving her Maserati through the winding roads of the Hamptons. The next she was waking up in Mount Sinai with doctors speaking in hushed tones about spinal cord injuries and the likelihood that she'd never walk again. The physical pain had been nothing compared to the look in people's eyes, that mixture of horror and relief that it wasn't them in that bed. The quarterly reports show a 12% increase in revenue. She would tell the board in exactly 9 minutes, her voice steady and commanding as always. They would nod and take notes, but she could see it in their faces, the question of how long the great Tiffany Ward could continue to lead from a wheelchair. How long before the vultures circled? A soft knock interrupted her brooding. "Come in," she called, expecting Margaret with some last-minute detail about the meeting. Instead, a man entered, tall, broad-shouldered, with hands that spoke of honest work and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore the standard-issue gray uniform of the building's maintenance staff, a toolbox in one hand, and a quiet confidence that immediately set Tiffany on edge. She wasn't used to service staff looking at her directly anymore. Most of them had learned to avert their gazes to pretend she was still the intimidating CEO rather than the broken woman in the chair. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Miss Ward," he said, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl that was oddly soothing. "There's a problem with the heating system in this section of the building. I need to check the vents." Tiffany's first instinct was to dismiss him, to have him return later when she wasn't preparing for what might be the most important board meeting of her career. But something about his manner stopped her. He wasn't looking at her with pity or curiosity. He was looking at her like she was simply a person, not a victim, not a symbol of tragic loss, just another human being. "Fine," she said curtly, wheeling herself toward her desk. "Just be quick about it." He moved efficiently around the office, checking vents with practiced ease. Tiffany tried to focus on her presentation notes, but she found herself stealing glances at him. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet strength, that reminded her of her father before the cancer took him. When he approached the vent near her desk, she caught sight of a small silver locket hanging from his neck, partially hidden beneath his uniform collar. "You have a daughter," she observed, nodding toward the locket. His hand moved instinctively to the jewelry, a soft smile crossing his weathered features. "Emma. She's 7. The pride in his voice was unmistakable, warm and genuine, in a way that made something twist in Tiffany's chest. Single father. Widower. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken pain. "My wife passed 3 years ago." Tiffany felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry." He nodded, his attention seemingly focused on the vent, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Cancer. It was a long fight." Something in his tone made her look up from her papers. "She was sick for a while. 2 years. His voice was quiet now, almost distant. "Toward the end, she couldn't walk. The treatments, they just took so much from her." He paused in his work, his hands stilling on the vent cover. "But she never gave up. Even when the doctors said there was no hope, she kept fighting. Kept believing she'd walk again." The words hit Tiffany like a physical blow. She felt her chest tighten, her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "Did she?" He turned to look at her, then really look at her, and for the first time in 18 months, Tiffany felt truly seen. Not as the broken heiress, not as the tragic figure in the wheelchair, but as a woman carrying her own unbearable weight. "She took 3 steps the day before she died," he said softly. 3 steps to our daughter's bedroom to kiss her goodnight one last time." Tears threatened at the corners of Tiffany's eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She didn't cry, not anymore. Crying was weakness, and weakness was something she couldn't afford. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. He replaced the vent cover with deliberate care before answering. "Because I know what it looks like when someone's given up. And I know what it looks like when someone's still fighting, even if they don't realize it." "You don't know anything about me." Tiffany snapped, her defenses slamming back into place. "You're a janitor. You're a woman who's been told she'll never walk again," he interrupted gently. "And you've decided to believe them." The audacity of his words left her momentarily speechless. No one spoke to her like that anymore. No one dared to challenge the great Tiffany Ward, wheelchair or no wheelchair. "Get out!" she whispered, her voice trembling with fury. "Get out of my office right now." But instead of leaving, he moved closer to her desk. Not intimidating, not aggressive, just present. "My name is Caleb Morgan," he said quietly, "and I think I can help you walk again." The words hung in the air like a challenge, like a prayer, like the most ridiculous thing anyone had ever said to her. Tiffany felt something break loose inside her chest, a laugh that bordered on hysteria. "You think you can help me walk again?" She repeated, the laughter building until it filled the office with its bitter music. "You, a janitor, think you can do what teams of the world's best doctors couldn't do?" Caleb didn't flinch at her laughter. He didn't look away or apologize or retreat. He simply stood there, solid and unshakable as a lighthouse in a storm. "The doctors told my wife she'd never walk again too," he said, when her laughter finally died away. "But she did. Not because of medicine or surgery or some miracle cure. She walked because she remembered that her body wasn't broken, just scared." "My spine was severed," Tiffany said coldly. "The nerves were damaged. It's not fear, it's physiology." "The doctor said your injury was incomplete," Caleb replied, and Tiffany's blood ran cold. How did he know that some sensation, some movement still possible with the right approach? But you stopped trying after 6 months of physical therapy didn't give you the results you wanted. "How dare you?" she began, but he held up a hand. I'm not here to judge you, Miss Ward. I'm here to offer you something no one else has: hope without pity, truth without sugarcoating, and a chance to fight for yourself instead of just surviving. Tiffany stared at him, this strange man who had walked into her perfectly controlled world and shattered it with a few simple words. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was insane, that she should call security and have him removed immediately. But there was something else, something she hadn't felt in 18 months. A tiny spark of curiosity, of possibility. Even if what you're saying is true, she said slowly, why would you help me? What could you possibly gain from this? Caleb's expression softened, and she saw grief there, and love, and a determination that reminded her of her own reflection in the mirror during her first few months of recovery, before she'd learned to stop hoping. Because my daughter asks me every night why some people get better and others don't, he said quietly. And I want to be able to tell her that sometimes they do get better. They just need someone who believes in them enough to show them how to believe in themselves. The office fell silent, except for the rain still beating against the windows. Margaret's voice drifted down the hallway, something about the board members getting restless. Tiffany's entire world balanced on the edge of a precipice on one side, the safe, predictable path of resignation and wealth-cushioned despair. On the other, the terrifying possibility of hope. The board meeting, she said weakly. We'll wait, Caleb replied. The question is, are you ready to stop running your life from that chair and start fighting for it instead? Tiffany Ward, who had built an empire through calculated risks and iron determination, found herself faced with the most impossible gamble of her life. Trust a janitor with her deepest, most broken places, or continue the slow suffocation of existing without truly living. She closed her eyes and saw her father's face the day he'd handed her the keys to Ward Industries. You're stronger than you know, Tiffany, he'd whispered. Don't ever forget that. When she opened her eyes, Caleb was still there, patient and steady, waiting for her answer. If I agree to this insanity, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, what exactly are you proposing? A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. That we start with the impossible and work our way down to the merely difficult. Margaret appeared in the doorway again, her expression anxious. Miss Ward, the board. Tell them the meeting is postponed, Tiffany said, never taking her eyes off Caleb. Tell them something urgent has come up. Margaret's face showed her confusion, but she nodded and retreated once more. In the silence that followed, Tiffany felt the first stirrings of something she'd thought was dead forever. The willingness to risk everything for the chance at something better. I must be insane, she murmured. Sanity is overrated, Caleb replied. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? You're already in a wheelchair. The comment should have been cruel, but delivered in his gentle drawl with that small smile, it somehow made her want to laugh again, not the bitter laughter of despair, but something lighter, more genuine. You're going to need access to the building after hours, she said, and even as the words left her mouth, she couldn't believe she was saying them. Margaret will arrange a security pass. We'll start Monday, Caleb said, shouldering his toolbox. Wear something you can move in, and Miss Ward, yes, bring a towel. He was halfway to the door when her voice stopped him. Caleb. He turned back, eyebrows raised. What if it doesn't work? What if I really am too broken to fix? For a long moment, he studied her face, and she had the strangest feeling he was seeing not just who she was now, but who she could become. Then we'll have spent some time together learning that broken doesn't mean worthless, he said finally. But I don't think that's what we're going to find. After he left, Tiffany sat alone in her office as the rain continued its relentless assault on the windows. She thought about the board meeting she'd just postponed, about the quarterly reports that would wait, about the empire that suddenly seemed less important than the impossible promise a janitor had just made. She thought about Caleb's wife taking 3 steps to kiss her daughter goodnight. She thought about hope and the terrifying weight of it. And for the first time in 18 months, Tiffany Ward allowed herself to wonder what it might feel like to stand again, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with the possibility of failure and heartbreak. But as she sat there in her tower high above Manhattan, she realized that the most dangerous thing wasn't the risk of falling. It was the risk of never trying to rise. The weekend stretched endlessly before Tiffany, each hour crawling by with the weight of second thoughts and mounting anxiety. She found herself staring at the phone a dozen times, ready to call Margaret and have her revoke Caleb's security access. What had possessed her to trust a complete stranger with something so intimate, so impossible? Yet every time her finger hovered over the speed dial, she remembered his eyes, storm gray and unwavering, holding none of the pity she'd grown so tired of seeing. Sunday evening found her in her penthouse bathroom, standing naked before the full-length mirror she usually avoided. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, thin, where she'd once been, curved, pale, where she'd once glowed with health and vitality. Her legs, once strong from years of horseback riding and tennis, hung lifeless from the wheelchair. She ran her hands over the surgical scars that crisscrossed her lower back, remembering the day Dr. Harrison had explained with clinical detachment that the damage was significant but incomplete. Some patients with similar injuries do regain limited function, he had said, his voice carefully neutral. But given the extent of the trauma and the time that's passed since the initial surgery, I wouldn't want to give you false hope, Miss Ward. False hope. The phrase had become her mantra, her shield against disappointment. Better to expect nothing than to risk the crushing weight of another failure. But now, as she traced the raised edges of her scars, she found herself wondering what Caleb saw when he looked at her. Not the broken heiress, he'd said. So what then? Monday morning arrived, gray and drizzling, matching her mood perfectly. She'd barely slept, tossing and turning as her mind raced through every possible scenario of humiliation and failure that awaited her. By 6:30, she was dressed in the closest thing she owned to workout clothes, a pair of designer yoga pants she'd bought but never worn, and a silk tank top that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. The Ward Industries building felt different after hours. Without the usual bustle of employees and the constant hum of business, it had taken on an almost cathedral-like quality. Her wheelchair whispered across the marble floors as she made her way to the elevator, her heart hammering against her ribs with each passing floor. When the elevator doors opened on the 52nd floor, she was surprised to find the lights already on in the conference room adjacent to her office. Through the glass walls, she could see Caleb arranging what looked like exercise equipment mats, resistance bands, and several items she didn't recognize. He looked up as her wheelchair approached, and that same calm smile crossed his features. "You came. I said I would." Her voice came out sharper than she intended, a defensive reflex she couldn't seem to control around him. "People say a lot of things." He gestured to the equipment spread across the conference table. "Especially when they're scared." "I'm not scared," she lied, parking her wheelchair near the table and eyeing the unfamiliar apparatus with suspicion. "I'm skeptical. There's a difference." Caleb chuckled, a warm sound that seemed to fill the sterile corporate space with unexpected life. "Fair enough. Skeptical I can work with." He picked up what looked like a modified pool noodle, except it was covered in a strange textured material. This is going to feel weird at first. What is it? Sensory stimulation tool. My wife's physical therapist used to say that sometimes the body forgets how to talk to the brain. We're going to remind it. The casual mention of his wife sent an unexpected pang through Tiffany's chest. She found herself studying his face for signs of the grief he must still carry, but his expression remained focused and professional. How long has it been since you've tried any kind of physical therapy? He asked, moving to kneel beside her wheelchair. 14 months. The admission felt like a confession of failure. I got tired of disappointing people. Who were you disappointing? She looked at him sharply. What kind of question is that? An important one. His hands were gentle as he began positioning the strange tool against her calf, though she couldn't feel his touch. Were you disappointing your doctors, your family, or yourself? The question hung in the air between them as he worked his movements sure and practiced. Tiffany found herself watching his hands calloused and strong, different from the soft, manicured fingers of the medical professionals who'd handled her before. There was something oddly comforting about their roughness, their obvious familiarity with real work and real struggle. All of the above, she finally admitted. My physical therapist was this eternally optimistic woman who kept talking about progress when all I could see was everything I couldn't do anymore. What did progress look like to her? Moving my toe a millimeter, feeling a tiny spark of sensation somewhere below my waist, pathetic little victories that felt more like insults than achievements. Caleb paused in his work, looking up at her with those steady gray eyes. And what would progress look like to you? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. They'd all had their own definitions, their own measurements of success and failure. Walking, she said without hesitation. Standing up out of this chair and walking across a room like a normal person. Okay. His simple acceptance of her seemingly impossible goal made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. Then that's what we'll work toward. Just like that. Just like that. He resumed his work, the textured tool moving in slow, deliberate patterns across her legs. But first, we start with remembering. Remembering what? What it felt like to move. What it felt like to be strong. What it felt like to believe your body could do impossible things. His voice had taken on a hypnotic quality, low and soothing as he worked. Despite herself, Tiffany felt some of the tension leaving her shoulders. I used to ride horses, she found herself saying. Before the accident. I had a stallion named Thunder, ridiculous name I know, but he was magnificent. Black as midnight with this wild spirit that most people were afraid of. But not you. No, I loved that about him. The way he refused to be tamed completely. Even when I was on his back, I could feel all that power thrumming beneath me, ready to explode into motion at any moment. Tell me about the first time you rode him. The memory came flooding back with startling clarity. He threw me. 3 times. The stable hands kept telling me to choose a gentler horse, but I wouldn't give up. The 4th time I got on his back, something clicked. He stopped fighting me and I stopped fighting him. We moved together like we were one creature. How did that feel? Like flying. The words slipped out before she could stop them, raw and honest. Like I was more than just human, more than just myself. That feeling, Caleb said softly. That's what we're going to find again. Something in his tone made her look down and she gasped. The textured tool in his hands was glowing with a soft, warm light, and for just a moment, impossible as it seemed, she could have sworn she felt a tiny tingle where it touched her leg. What? She began, but the sensation was gone as quickly as it had come. Did you feel that? Caleb's voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the excitement in his eyes. I'm not sure. Maybe. It might have been my imagination. Maybe it was. Or maybe your body is starting to remember how to listen. He continued working in silence for a while, the strange tool tracing patterns across her legs and feet. Tiffany found herself closing her eyes, trying to recapture that fleeting sensation, that tiny spark of something that might have been feeling. "Tell me about Emma," she said suddenly, needing to focus on something other than the desperate hope building in her chest. Caleb's hands stilled for a moment. "What would you like to know? What's she like besides being 7 and having a father who thinks he can work miracles?" A smile tugged at his lips. "She's fierce, like her mother was. She's got this way of looking at the world like everything is possible, even when logic says it isn't. Sounds like someone else I know. She wants to be a doctor when she grows up. Says she's going to help people the way the doctors tried to help her mom." His voice grew thick with emotion. "Some nights I find her in her room with her dolls pretending to perform surgery on them, making them better. That must be hard for you." "Yeah." The admission was barely above a whisper. "But also, proud you know she could have let losing her mother make her bitter, make her afraid of the world. Instead, she wants to heal it." Tiffany felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of the grief they both carried. His was sharp and fresh from the loss of love. Hers was duller but no less painful, mourning the loss of herself. "Is that why you're doing this?" she asked. "To prove to her that healing is possible?" "Partly." He moved to her other leg, beginning the same slow, methodical process. "But mostly because I made a promise." "To whom?" "To Sarah, my wife." His voice grew distant, remembering. "The night before she died, she made me swear something. She said there would be other people like her people who'd lost hope, and that if I ever had the chance to help them remember how to fight, I should take it." The weight of that promise settled between them, like a third presence in the room. Tiffany suddenly understood that this wasn't just about her walking again. It was about honoring the memory of a woman who'd faced the impossible with grace and determination. "What if I can't do it?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, vulnerable and raw. "What if I'm not strong enough?" Caleb looked up at her then, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Strength isn't about never falling down, Miss Ward. It's about deciding to get back up even when everything in you wants to stay down." "Tiffany," she corrected softly, "if you're going to be touching my legs and making impossible promises, you might as well call me Tiffany." "Tiffany." The way he said her name like it was something precious and worth protecting made warmth bloom in her chest. "Tell me about the day she walked those 3 steps, Tiffany said, surprising herself with the request. Caleb's hands paused in their work, his expression growing distant. It was a Tuesday. Emma had drawn her a picture at school, some crayon masterpiece of our family, with stick figures and a rainbow. Sarah had been bedridden for weeks at that point, barely conscious most days from the pain medication. He resumed the gentle pressure against her calf, his voice taking on that hypnotic cadence again. But when Emma showed her the picture, something changed in Sarah's eyes. Like a light had been switched back on. She asked me to help her sit up then, to help her stand. "Were you afraid?" "Terrified. The doctors had said any movement could be dangerous at that point. But she had this look on her face, this determination, that I'd fallen in love with the first day I met her. I couldn't say no." Tiffany could picture it so clearly, the dying woman summoning strength from some impossible reserve, the man torn between fear and love, the little girl watching with wide eyes, as her mother defied every medical prediction. She stood for maybe 30 seconds, swaying like a tree in the wind. Then she looked at Emma's bedroom door and said, "I need to say goodnight properly." I tried to talk her out of it, tried to get her to lie back down, but Sarah could be stubborn when she set her mind to something. "Like someone else I know," Tiffany murmured, earning a small smile. Step 1 was the hardest. Her whole body was shaking, and I could see the pain in her face, but she took it anyway. Step 2 was a little easier, like her legs were remembering what they were supposed to do. Step 3. His voice broke slightly. Step 3 was pure love, pure determination to give her daughter one last perfect moment. Tears were streaming down Tiffany's face now, though she couldn't say exactly when they'd started. Did Emma understand how special that was? She was 7 then too, the same age Emma is now. She just saw her mommy coming to tuck her in like everything was normal. Caleb's voice grew soft with memory. Sarah spent 20 minutes in that room reading Emma a story, singing her a lullaby, kissing every one of her stuffed animals goodnight. When she finally came out, she couldn't walk anymore. I had to carry her back to bed. And she died the next day. That night, in her sleep holding my hand. But peaceful, like she'd finished something important. The silence that followed was heavy with shared grief and understanding. Tiffany found herself thinking about her own mother, who died when she was 16, and how there were so many things left unsaid between them. So many moments of connection that she'd been too proud or too busy to accept. "I felt it again," she whispered suddenly. Caleb's hands stilled immediately. "Where?" "My ankle. Just for a second, but I'm sure this time." The hope in his eyes was almost too much to bear. "That's good, Tiffany. That's really good." "Don't get excited yet," she said quickly, though her own heart was racing. "It could be phantom sensation. My doctors warned me about that. Or it could be your body waking up." They worked in comfortable silence for the next hour, the strange glowing tool tracing patterns across her legs as the city lights began to twinkle outside the conference room windows. Tiffany found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months, lulled by the rhythm of Caleb's movements and the steady warmth of his presence. "Why aren't you married?" she asked suddenly, then immediately regretted the personal question. But Caleb didn't seem offended. "Haven't met anyone who could handle having a 7-year-old stepdaughter and a father who works as a janitor." "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant." His smile was sad, but not bitter. "The truth is, I'm not ready, Sarah and I. What we had was special. Lightning in a bottle, I'm not sure I believe in that kind of love twice in one lifetime." "Maybe you're not supposed to find the same love twice," Tiffany said softly. "Maybe you're supposed to find a different kind." The words hung between them, carrying a weight she hadn't intended. When their eyes met, she saw something flicker in his gaze, surprise recognition, and something else that made her pulse quicken. "It's getting late," he said, his voice suddenly formal. "We should probably call it a night. Already." She glanced at her watch, shocked to see that nearly 3 hours had passed. "But we barely got started." "Recovery isn't a sprint, Tiffany. It's a marathon. If we push too hard too fast, we'll just end up frustrated and discouraged." As he began packing up his equipment, she found herself reluctant to leave. The evening had given her something she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Hope, yes, but also connection. For the first time since her accident, she'd felt like herself again, not just the broken version everyone tiptoed around. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked, trying to keep the eagerness out of her voice. "If you want to." "I do." The admission came out more forcefully than she'd intended, surprising them both. Caleb paused in his packing, studying her face. This isn't going to be easy, Tiffany. There are going to be days when nothing happens, when you feel like we're wasting our time. Days when you want to give up. I gave up a long time ago, she said quietly. Maybe it's time I tried the alternative. As they rode down in the elevator together, Tiffany caught their reflections in the polished steel doors. She was surprised to see that her face looked different, somehow softer, more alive than it had in months. Beside her, Caleb stood with his hands clasped behind his back, the very picture of professional calm. But she could see the tension in his shoulders that suggested this was affecting him too. Caleb, she said, as they reached the lobby. Yes. Thank you. For tonight. For believing something might be possible when everyone else has given up. He turned to look at her, and in the soft light of the lobby, his eyes seemed to hold depths she'd never noticed before. Don't thank me yet, Tiffany. Thank me when you're dancing at your next charity gala. The image he painted, herself standing and swaying to music, free from the constraints of her wheelchair, was so vivid and so impossible that it took her breath away. As he walked away into the rainy Manhattan night, she found herself touching the places on her legs where she'd sworn she felt sensation returning. Dancing. When was the last time she'd even thought about dancing? But as she made her way home through the empty streets, Tiffany Ward allowed herself to imagine music and movement and the feeling of being whole again. For the first time in 18 months, the future didn't seem like something to be endured. It seemed like something to be embraced. The days that followed blurred together in a rhythm of anticipation and uncertainty. Tiffany found herself watching the clock during board meetings, her mind wandering to the gentle pressure of Caleb's hands and the impossible tingling sensations that came and went like whispers. She'd catch herself flexing her toes beneath conference tables, searching for signs of life in limbs that had been silent for so long. By Thursday, the sensations were undeniable. Not just phantom pain or wishful thinking, but real, honest-to-God feeling creeping back into her legs like sunrise after the longest night. When Caleb arrived for their fourth session, she was practically vibrating with excitement. I can feel my knees, she announced, before he'd even finished setting up his equipment. Not everything, but when I press here, she demonstrated, placing her palm against her kneecap. There's definitely something happening. Caleb's smile was radiant, transforming his usually serious features into something that made her heart skip. That's incredible progress for less than a week. Is it normal to happen this fast? There's no normal when it comes to spinal cord recovery, he said, kneeling beside her wheelchair with the now familiar textured tool. Every person, every injury, every journey is different. But Tiffany, what you're experiencing, it's remarkable. The way he said her name had changed over the past few days. Less formal, more intimate, like a prayer or a promise. She found herself craving the sound of it on his lips, which was dangerous territory for a woman who'd sworn off emotional complications. Tell me about your day, he said, as he began the session, his hands moving with practiced expertise along her calf. What did you do besides count the hours until tonight? Fired my head of marketing, she said with dark satisfaction. Apparently, he's been embezzling funds for the past 6 months. The forensic accountants found a paper trail leading to a gambling addiction and a very expensive mistress in the Cayman Islands. How did that make you feel? The question caught her off guard. Most people would have asked about the financial impact or the legal implications. Only Caleb would care about her emotional response. Powerful, she admitted. For the first time since the accident, I felt like myself again. Not the broken version everyone tiptoes around, but the woman who built this company from the ground up. Maybe the accident didn't break you as much as you thought it did. She considered this as his hands worked their magic, the strange tool sending waves of sensation through nerve pathways that had been dormant for months. My father used to say that steel becomes strongest when it's heated and hammered, that the pressure is what makes it unbreakable. Smart man. He would have liked you, she said without thinking, then immediately regretted the admission. It was too personal, too revealing of how much space Caleb was beginning to occupy in her thoughts. But instead of pulling back, he looked up at her with those storm-gray eyes. What makes you say that? He didn't trust people easily, but he had a sixth sense about character. He could spot someone authentic from across a room. She paused, studying his face in the soft light. He would have seen what I see in you. And what's that? The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities neither of them seemed ready to explore fully. Tiffany felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. Integrity, she said finally, though it wasn't quite the whole truth. The kind of man who keeps promises even when they're impossible. Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Sometimes impossible promises are the only ones worth keeping. The moment stretched between them, electric with unspoken understanding. Then the tool in his hands pulsed with that strange, warm light, and Tiffany gasped as sensation flooded through her leg like water breaking through a dam. Oh God! She breathed, her hands gripping the wheelchair's armrests. I can feel everything. Your hands, the pressure, even the texture of that thing. Caleb's face lit up with pure joy. Try to move your foot. Don't force it. Just think about it. Tiffany stared down at her right foot, concentrating with an intensity that made her temples throb. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, so slowly, it might have been her imagination, her toes began to curl. The sound that escaped her was half sob, half laugh. Did you see that? I saw it. His voice was thick with emotion. Tiffany, you're doing it. You're really doing it. Tears were streaming down her face now, 18 months of suppressed hope and grief pouring out in a torrent she couldn't control. I was so sure I'd never. I know. Caleb's hand covered hers, warm and solid and real. But you're stronger than you knew, stronger than they told you. The touch of his skin against hers sent shockwaves through her system that had nothing to do with nerve regeneration. When had she started seeing him not just as her unlikely therapist, but as a man? When had his presence become the highlight of her days? We should try standing, she said suddenly, wiping at her tears with the back of her free hand. Whoa, slow down there. But he was smiling as he said it. Recovery is a process, remember. We don't want to push too hard, too fast. But if I can feel my legs, if I can move my toes, then tomorrow we'll work on ankle flexion. Next week, maybe we'll try some supported weight bearing. This isn't a race, Tiffany. She wanted to argue, wanted to demand they try everything right now, while the sensations were strong and the hope was burning bright in her chest. But something in his expression stopped her. There was caution there, yes, but also something deeper. Fear. You're scared, she realized. You're scared it won't work. Caleb's hand tightened slightly on hers. I'm scared of watching you fall apart if it doesn't work as quickly as you want it to. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Tiffany found herself studying his face, seeing past the calm competence to the man beneath. The widower who'd watched his wife fight an impossible battle. The father trying to keep impossible promises. The janitor who somehow believed he could heal what teams of specialists couldn't fix. Is that what happened with Sarah? She asked gently. Did she push too hard? His smile was sad and distant. Sarah never knew when to quit. It was one of the things I loved most about her, and one of the things that scared me the most. Even when the doctors said the treatments weren't working, when the cancer had spread too far, she kept fighting, kept believing she could beat it through sheer willpower. Maybe she did beat it, Tiffany said softly. Maybe not the way she wanted to, but she got to say goodbye to Emma properly. She got to choose how her story ended. Caleb looked at her then with an expression of such profound gratitude that it took her breath away. I never thought of it that way. We see what we need to see, she said, echoing something her father used to tell her. Sometimes it just takes time to find the right perspective. They worked in comfortable silence for another hour, Caleb's hands coaxing feeling back into nerve pathways that had been dark for so long. The sensations were stronger now, more consistent, spreading from her feet, up toward her knees, like warmth returning to frost-bitten limbs. Can I ask you something personal? Tiffany said, as he began packing up his equipment. More personal than letting me touch your legs for 3 hours every night. The casual intimacy in his voice made her pulse quicken. Do you ever regret it? Taking care of Sarah through everything. Never having a normal relationship. Caleb paused in his packing, his hands stilling on the strange glowing tool. That's a hell of a question. You don't have to answer. No, it's fair. He resumed his careful organization of equipment, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. There were moments, especially toward the end, when I wondered what our lives might have looked like if she'd been healthy. If we could have grown old together, traveled the world, watched Emma graduate and get married and have kids of her own. But then I'd look at her sleeping, even when she was at her worst, and I'd think that I'd rather have one day with her as she was than a lifetime with anyone else. He looked up at her, then his eyes bright with unshed tears. Love isn't always convenient, Tiffany. Sometimes it asks you to do impossible things. The weight of his words settled between them like a challenge. Tiffany found herself thinking about her own love life. The string of casual relationships with men who wanted her money or her connections, but never really saw her. She'd convinced herself that was enough, that real intimacy was a luxury she couldn't afford in the cutthroat world of corporate leadership. But sitting here with Caleb, feeling sensation return to places that had been numb for so long, she wondered if she'd been the one who was really paralyzed all along. I should go, she said suddenly, though every fiber of her being wanted to stay in this warm cocoon of possibility and connection. Same time tomorrow. Actually, she hesitated, then plunged ahead before she could lose her nerve. Would you like to have dinner first? There's a little Italian place around the corner that stays open late. Nothing fancy, just Tiffany. The way he said her name was gentle but firm. I don't think that's a good idea. The rejection stung more than she'd expected. Right, of course. You're here in a professional capacity. I shouldn't have. It's not about that. He moved closer to her wheelchair, close enough that she could smell his aftershave and see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. It's about the fact that I'm already way too invested in your recovery to be objective. Adding dinner to the equation would be complicated, dangerous. The word came out rougher than he'd probably intended, and she saw heat flicker in his gaze before he looked away. For both of us. But the damage was done. The admission hung between them like a live wire sparking with possibilities neither of them seemed ready to explore. Tiffany felt her breath catch as the full implication of his words sank in. Caleb, I'll see you tomorrow night, he said, shouldering his equipment bag with deliberate finality. Same time, same place. He was halfway to the elevator when her voice stopped him. What if I asked as a friend, someone who's tired of eating alone and curious about the man who's giving her back her life? He turned back slowly, conflict written across his features. Tiffany. One dinner. Italian food and conversation. Nothing more complicated than that. For a long moment he stood frozen in the elevator alcove, torn between desire and responsibility. Finally his shoulders sagged in defeat. One dinner, he agreed. But we eat first, then work on your legs. And if things get too complicated, yeah, if things get too complicated, we go back to the professional arrangement. No questions asked. Deal. She tried to keep the triumph out of her voice, but she was pretty sure she failed. The next evening, Tiffany found herself in the unusual position of being nervous about a dinner date. She'd dined with senators and celebrities, negotiated deals over five-star meals, and commanded boardrooms full of powerful men. But the thought of sharing pizza with a janitor had her changing outfits 3 times and checking her lipstick in every reflective surface. She arrived at Marcello's 15 minutes early, a tiny family-owned restaurant that had somehow survived the gentrification of Midtown Manhattan through sheer stubbornness and incredible food. The owner, a weathered Italian man in his 70s, greeted her wheelchair with the same casual acceptance he might have shown a walking customer. "You want the usual table?" he asked in accented English. "I don't have a usual table," Tiffany replied, confused. "Ah, but your friend," he called ahead, "said you might need the one by the window, no steps to navigate. Very thoughtful man, this one." Warmth spread through her chest at the consideration Caleb had shown. When had anyone ever thought ahead about the practicalities of her wheelchair? Usually she had to call ahead herself, explaining her needs with a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. He arrived precisely on time, and Tiffany felt her breath catch at the sight of him. Gone was the gray maintenance uniform, replaced by dark jeans and a button-down shirt that brought out the color of his eyes. He looked younger, somehow less burdened, and when he smiled at her across the small table, she felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with nerve regeneration. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the honesty in his voice made her cheeks warm. "You clean up pretty well yourself." They ordered wine and fell into easy conversation, the awkwardness she'd expected nowhere to be found. Caleb told her about Emma's latest school project, a diorama of the solar system that had taken over their entire dining room table. Tiffany found herself sharing stories about her father, memories she rarely spoke about with anyone. "He used to bring me to the office on Saturdays," she said, twirling pasta around her fork. "I'd sit in his big leather chair and pretend I was running board meetings with my stuffed animals. He'd play along, asking my teddy bear Mr. Whiskers for quarterly projections. Sounds like he was grooming you to take over pretty early. I thought so too until I got older and realized he was just spending time with me. The business was never the point, it was about being together." Do you miss that? Having someone who understood that side of you? The question hit deeper than she'd expected. I miss having someone who saw potential in me instead of just seeing what I lacked. Is that what you think people see now? What you lack? Tiffany set down her fork, considering. Don't you? When you look at me, isn't the wheelchair the first thing you notice? Caleb leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. You want to know what I see when I look at you? Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. What? I see a woman who built an empire before she was 30. I see someone who fires incompetent employees and keeps impossible schedules and probably intimidates the hell out of most people she meets. He paused, taking a sip of wine. I see someone who's so used to being strong that she forgot it's okay to be vulnerable sometimes. And the wheelchair is just a chair. His voice was matter-of-fact, as if stating the most obvious thing in the world. It doesn't define you any more than my janitor's uniform defines me. The The simple truth of it hit her like a physical blow. For 18 months, she'd let her disability become her identity, let it shrink her world down to the size of what she thought she could still do from a seated position. But sitting here with Caleb, feeling sensation flowing back into her legs and genuine connection flowing between them, she realized how much of herself she'd given up without a fight. "I used to dance," she said suddenly, "before the accident. Not professionally or anything, but I loved it. The way music could move through your whole body, the feeling of being weightless and grounded at the same time." "What kind of dancing?" "Everything. Ballet when I was little, jazz and contemporary in high school. But my favorite was ballroom. There's something about moving with a partner, about trust and communication without words." She trailed off, realizing how impossible it all sounded now. "Tell me about your favorite dance." She looked at him suspiciously. "Why?" "Because when you talk about dancing, your whole face lights up. And because I want to understand what we're working toward." The "we" in that sentence made her heart skip. "There was this charity gala 3 years ago. The theme was A Night in Vienna, and they hired this incredible string quartet. I wore this midnight blue gown that moved like water, and my partner David, a family friend, he was this amazing dancer." "What happened?" "The music started, and it was like the whole room disappeared. Just the two of us and this perfect waltz spinning around the ballroom like we were floating. For those 3 minutes, I felt like I could do anything, be anything." She paused, lost in the memory. "I actually cried when the song ended. What if I told you that could happen again?" The question hung between them, impossible and tempting. "Caleb, I can barely move my toes. Dancing is what we're building toward." His voice was firm, certain. "Every sensation you get back, every muscle that remembers how to respond, it's all preparing your body for movement. Real movement. But even if I could stand, even if I could walk, dancing requires balance and grace and trust," he finished. "Dancing requires trust in your partner and trust in yourself." The way he looked at her when he said it made something warm unfurl in her chest. "Are you offering to be my dance partner, Caleb Morgan?" "I'm offering to be whatever you need me to be." The words carried a weight that went far beyond physical therapy. They sat in silence for a moment, the implications settling between them like sediment in still water. "This is getting complicated," Tiffany said finally. "Yeah, it is. We should probably go upstairs and work on my legs." Probably should. But neither of them moved to leave. Instead, they sat in the warm glow of the restaurant's candlelight, drinking wine and talking about everything and nothing. Emma's dreams of medical school, Tiffany's secret love of terrible reality TV, Caleb's plans to someday build furniture in his garage, her memories of riding thunder through morning mist in the Hamptons. It was past 10 when they finally made their way back to Ward Industries, both of them slightly wine-warmed and reluctant to break the spell of the evening. In the elevator, Tiffany found herself hyper-aware of Caleb's presence beside her, the way his hand briefly touched hers when he reached for the button, the clean smell of his soap, and the warmth radiating from his body. "I had a good time tonight," she said, as the elevator climbed toward the 52nd floor. "So did I." His voice was softer now, more intimate in the confined space. "Maybe too good a time. Why is that a bad thing?" The elevator dinged softly as they reached their floor, but neither of them moved when the doors opened. "Because in 3 weeks, when you're walking again, when you don't need me anymore, you're going to realize that you're a billionaire heiress and I'm a janitor with a 7-year-old daughter and a mortgage on a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens." The pain in his voice caught her off guard. "You think this is about money? Isn't everything not this?" She wheeled herself out of the elevator, forcing him to follow. Not what's happening between us. Tiffany, do you think I'm the kind of person who'd use you for entertainment? Some rich woman playing with the help? No. The admission was quiet but firm. But I think you're the kind of person who's used to getting what she wants when she wants it. And I think you might not have considered what happens when the novelty wears off. His words stung because they carried an echo of truth. She was used to getting what she wanted, used to discarding things and people when they no longer served her purposes. But this felt different. He felt different. You're right, she said, as they entered the conference room. I am used to getting my way. I'm demanding and impatient and probably impossible to be around most of the time. But I've never wanted anything the way I want this. This. She gestured between them, encompassing the equipment. He was setting up, the sensation slowly returning to her legs, the warmth that bloomed in her chest every time he looked at her. All of it. The walking, yes, but also you. The way you see me, the way you make me feel like myself again. She took a shaky breath. I know it's complicated. I know there are a dozen reasons why it won't work. But I also know that for the first time in 18 months, I wake up looking forward to something instead of just dreading another day. Caleb had gone very still during her confession, his hands frozen on the sensory equipment. When he looked up at her, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Tiffany, don't say anything yet, she said quickly. Just, let's see what happens. Let's work on my legs and talk about Emma's school projects and eat terrible Italian food, and maybe somewhere in all of that we'll figure out what this is. For a long moment, he studied her face in the soft lighting of the conference room. Finally, he nodded. Okay. But I have conditions. Such as, no more dinner invitations until you can walk across this room under your own power. The physical therapy stays the priority, and we don't let whatever this is between us compromise your recovery. Deal. Anything else? When you're dancing again, not if, when you save me one waltz. The promise hung between them like a covenant binding them together in ways that had nothing to do with contracts or professional obligations. As Caleb knelt beside her wheelchair and began the familiar ritual of coaxing life back into her legs, Tiffany closed her eyes and let herself imagine music and movement and the feeling of being held by someone who saw her as whole. The sensations that night were stronger than ever, spreading from her toes up through her calves like wildfire through dry grass. When Caleb asked her to try flexing her ankle, she managed not just movement, but actual strength enough to push against his hand with genuine force. We're going to try standing next week, he said, as he packed up his equipment, and the certainty in his voice made her believe it might actually be possible. As they parted ways in the lobby, Tiffany found herself reluctant to let the evening end. Caleb. He turned back, eyebrows raised. Thank you. For dinner, for believing in me, for all of it. Thank you for trusting me with something so important. My legs, your hope. He smiled, and the warmth in his expression made her breath catch. Sleep well, Tiffany. Dream about dancing. As she made her way home through the nearly empty streets of Manhattan, Tiffany Ward did exactly that. For the first time in 18 months, her dreams were full of music and movement and the possibility of miracles. And in every vision of her future self spinning across a ballroom floor, there was a man with storm-gray eyes and gentle hands holding her steady as she learned to fly again. The dreams of dancing sustained her through the weekend, but Monday brought reality crashing back with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Tiffany arrived at her office to find Margaret pale-faced and trembling, a tablet clutched in her white-knuckled hands. Miss Ward, I'm so sorry. I tried to contain it, but it's already gone viral. The tablet screen showed a gossip blog's homepage dominated by a grainy photograph that made Tiffany's blood turn to ice. There she was, sitting at the window table of Marcello's wine glass, raised in a toast, her face animated with laughter. Across from her sat Caleb, looking devastatingly handsome in his button-down shirt, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that even the poor photo quality couldn't diminish. The headline screamed in bold type, "Tragic Heiress's Secret Romance, Ward Industries CEO, Tiffany Ward spotted in intimate dinner with mystery man." But it was the sub-headline that made her stomach drop. Sources close to the situation question whether paralyzed billionaire is faking her disability for sympathy. Who? Tiffany's voice came out as barely a whisper. We don't know yet. The photographer was positioned across the street, had to use a telephoto lens. But Miss Ward, Margaret's voice cracked. The article suggests that you've been seen walking. Tiffany's hands shook as she scrolled through the venomous piece. Anonymous sources claimed to have witnessed her standing at various locations around the city. Medical experts who had never examined her questioned the legitimacy of her paralysis. Social media comments ranged from supportive to cruel, with hashtags like fake disability and #richgirl. Lies trending. The board is requesting an emergency meeting, Margaret continued. And your phone has been ringing nonstop. Everyone from TMZ to the Wall Street Journal wants a statement. The words felt like they were coming from underwater. 18 months of private struggle, of learning to navigate a world that saw her as broken, and now strangers on the internet were calling her a liar. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. She was finally miraculously beginning to regain sensation in her legs, and the world had chosen this moment to accuse her of faking her paralysis. Cancel everything, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. All meetings, all calls, I need to think. Miss Ward, the board can wait. She looked up at Margaret with eyes that had turned to steel. And if anyone from the press calls, tell them I have no comment at this time. After Margaret left, Tiffany sat alone in her office, staring at the photograph that had somehow captured the most genuine happiness she'd felt in years and turned it into ammunition for her enemies. The cruel comments scrolled endlessly, each one a fresh wound. Rich bitch probably never needed that chair. Fake disability for fake sympathy. Disgusting. My brother is actually paralyzed and would give anything to walk. This is an insult to real disabled people. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, scrolling to Caleb's number. He answered on the first ring. Tiffany, I was just about to call you. You've seen it? Yeah. His voice was heavy with something that might have been guilt. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should have been more careful, should have thought about how it would look. It's not your fault. The words came out sharper than she intended. It's mine for thinking I could have something normal, something real, without it being dissected and destroyed by strangers. What are you going to do? She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 18 months of careful reputation management crumbling around her. I don't know. My board wants an emergency meeting. The press is circling like vultures. And the worst part is... Her voice cracked. The worst part is that some of it's true. I am starting to walk again. Just a little, just barely, but enough that if someone saw me at the right moment... That doesn't make you a liar, Tiffany. That makes you a miracle. His faith in her unwavering, even in the face of public scandal, nearly broke her composure entirely. You don't understand. These people, they're not interested in miracles. They want blood in the water. They want to see the mighty fall. Then don't fall. The simple statement hung between them like a challenge. What? Don't fall. Don't let them define your story. His voice grew stronger, more certain. You want to know what I see when I look at that picture? I see a woman who was brave enough to try again. Brave enough to hope again. Brave enough to let someone help her when she'd given up on help. Tears were streaming down her face now, 18 months of suppressed emotion pouring out in a torrent she couldn't control. I'm scared, Caleb. I'm scared they'll take away everything I've worked for. I'm scared they'll destroy the company my father built. And I'm terrified that this will ruin whatever's happening between us before we even know what it is. Listen to me. His voice was firm, commanding. Fear is just noise, Tiffany. It's loud and it's distracting, but it's not real. You know what's real, the sensation in your legs, the progress you've made, the strength it took to trust me when everyone else had given up on you. But the board will do whatever the strongest person in the room tells them to do, and you're still the strongest person in that room, wheelchair or no wheelchair. His absolute certainty in her ability to weather this storm was both comforting and terrifying. What if I can't? What if this breaks me? Then I'll help you put the pieces back together. The promise was quiet but unshakable. That's what partners do. Partners. The word sent warmth flooding through her chest, despite the chaos surrounding them. Is that what we are? I don't know what we are yet, he admitted. But I know I'm not walking away because some tabloid took a picture of us eating pasta. After they hung up, Tiffany sat in her office as the Manhattan skyline glittered beyond her windows. The board meeting was in 2 hours. She could face them from a position of weakness, apologetic and defensive, or she could remind them exactly who had built Ward Industries into the empire it was today. She reached for her phone and dialed Margaret's extension. Set up a press conference for tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. sharp, and call Dr. Harrison at Mount Sinai. I want my complete medical records available for review by any journalist who questions the legitimacy of my condition. Miss Ward, are you sure? Once those records are public, they'll show 18 months of genuine paralysis, failed treatments, and recent unexplained improvement. Her voice was growing stronger with each word. Let them question my integrity. Let them demand transparency. I have nothing to hide. The board meeting that afternoon was brutal. 12 men and 2 women sat around the polished mahogany table, their faces carefully neutral as they discussed her future as if she weren't in the room. The optics are terrible, said Harrison Webb, the silver-haired chairman, who'd been her father's best friend. The disability sympathy was a significant factor in maintaining public support after the accident. If the perception shifts to fraud, then what? Tiffany's voice cut through the room like a blade. You'll force me out, strip me of the company my father left me because I had dinner with a friend. It's not about the dinner, Tiffany. This from Patricia Chen, the only woman on the board besides herself. It's about maintaining investor confidence. The stock has already dropped 8% since the story broke. And it will recover when I address the situation publicly tomorrow. She looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. Unless, of course, this board would prefer to be known as the group that abandoned their CEO the moment she showed signs of recovery. The implications of her words settled over the room like a blanket of snow. Harrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. Recovery. Partial recovery, she corrected. Under the care of a specialist who's helping me regain limited function in my lower extremities. The same specialist I was photographed having dinner with as a thank you for his extraordinary efforts. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. The board members exchanged glances, uncertainty replacing their earlier confidence. If you're improving, said James Rodriguez, the youngest member and her staunchest ally, shouldn't that be cause for celebration rather than scandal? One would think, Tiffany replied dryly. But apparently, the court of public opinion prefers its victims to remain victimized. The meeting ended with a tentative agreement to support her through the current crisis contingent on her press conference, successfully addressing the controversy. As the board members filed out, Harrison lingered behind. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. "The way you handled yourself today, the strength you showed, it reminded me of him. He would have told me to fight back twice as hard." Yes, he would have. Harrison's smile was sad but genuine. He also would have told you to be careful who you trust. The world is full of people who would use your kindness against you. After he left, Tiffany remained at the conference table, her reflection ghost-like in its polished surface. The weight of tomorrow's press conference pressed down on her like a physical thing, but beneath the anxiety was something else, a determination she hadn't felt since before the accident. Her phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. "How did it go? Still employed?" She typed back. "Press conference tomorrow at 10. You'll be brilliant. How do you know? Because you're fighting for something that matters, and you don't know how to lose." His faith in her was both humbling and empowering. As she made her way home through the city streets, she found herself noticing things she'd missed for months. The way the evening light painted the buildings gold, the laughter of children playing in a small park, the simple beauty of life continuing despite the chaos in her world. That night, she called her physical therapist from before, Dr. Sarah Martinez, who'd been trying unsuccessfully to help her for months before Tiffany had given up. "Tiffany. My God, I saw the news. Are you all right?" "I'm better than all right," she said, and meant it. "Sarah, I need you to do something for me. I need you to examine me tomorrow before the press conference. Document whatever changes you find." "Changes? I've been working with someone. Unconventional methods but effective. I have sensation returning limited movement. I need a medical professional to verify it." The silence on the other end stretched so long that Tiffany wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Dr. Martinez spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "Tiffany, are you saying you're walking again?" "I'm saying I'm trying to. And tomorrow I'm going to show the world that recovery doesn't always look like what we expect it to." The examination the next morning was thorough and professional. Dr. Martinez tested reflexes that had been absent for 18 months, documented sensation in areas that had been completely numb, recorded muscle responses that defied every prediction in Tiffany's medical file. "This is extraordinary," she murmured as she helped Tiffany back into her wheelchair. "The improvement is undeniable, but the pattern is unlike anything I've seen. What exactly has this specialist been doing?" "Reminding my body how to hope," Tiffany said simply. The press conference was held in the main auditorium of Ward Industries, a space that could seat 300, but felt intimate with its warm lighting and wood paneling. Tiffany had chosen to remain in her wheelchair for the event, despite Dr. Martinez's suggestion that demonstrating her improved mobility might silence her critics more effectively. "This isn't about proving anything to them," she'd explained. "It's about telling my truth on my terms." The room was packed with journalists, cameras, and curiosity seekers. As she rolled onto the small stage, Tiffany felt a calm settle over her that she recognized from her most successful business presentations. This was her element, facing hostile audiences and winning them over through sheer force of will and absolute transparency. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "I'm here to address the questions that have been raised about my condition, my character, and my integrity." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the audience. In the back row, she spotted Caleb, his face tense with worry, but his eyes full of unwavering support. The sight of him gave her strength. 18 months ago, I was in a car accident that resulted in significant spinal cord trauma. The doctors told me I would never walk again. I spent 6 months in intensive physical therapy before accepting that verdict as permanent. Her voice was steady, matter-of-fact. I was wrong to give up, but I was not wrong about the severity of my injuries. A hand shot up from the press corps. Miss Ward, sources suggest you've been seen standing. How do you explain that? I explain it as the beginning of what I hope will be a long journey back to full mobility. The admission sent a ripple of surprise through the audience. 3 weeks ago, I began working with a specialist in alternative rehabilitation techniques. Under his care, I have regained limited sensation and some voluntary movement in my lower extremities. Another reporter jumped in. Why keep this recovery secret? Why not share this hopeful development with your shareholders and the public? Because recovery from spinal cord injury is unpredictable and fragile, Tiffany replied. Because I refused to give anyone false hope, including myself, until I understood the extent of the improvement. And because I believed I had the right to some privacy during what has been an intensely personal journey. But you were photographed having dinner with this specialist, called out a tabloid reporter. How do you explain the intimate nature of that interaction? For the first time, Tiffany's composure wavered slightly. The question cut to the heart of her vulnerability, the part of this story she was least prepared to discuss publicly. I explain it as gratitude, she said finally. This man has given me something I thought was lost forever: hope. If having dinner with someone who's changing my life constitutes inappropriate behavior, then I suppose I'm guilty as charged. Is there a romantic relationship? The question came from the same reporter, sensing weakness. Tiffany's eyes found Caleb in the crowd, saw him tense as he waited for her answer. This was the moment that could destroy everything between them, the choice between protecting their privacy and protecting her reputation. There is a relationship based on mutual respect, professional collaboration, and yes, genuine caring. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. If that troubles people more than my potential recovery from paralysis, then I would suggest they examine their priorities. The press conference continued for another 20 minutes, with Tiffany fielding questions about her medical records, her fitness to run the company, and the impact on Ward Industries stock. She answered each query with calm professionalism, neither defensive nor apologetic. As the event concluded and the reporters began filing out, Caleb made his way through the crowd toward the stage. When he reached her, his expression was unreadable. That was either very brave or very stupid, he said quietly. Probably both. She looked up at him, suddenly exhausted. Are we okay after what I said up there? Instead of answering, he knelt beside her wheelchair, taking her hands in his. You want to know what I heard when you were talking to those reporters? What? I heard a woman refusing to be ashamed of getting better. I heard someone willing to risk everything to tell the truth about hope and healing and the messiness of real life. His thumbs brushed across her knuckles. I heard my partner fighting for both of us. The word partner sent warmth flooding through her chest all over again. So we're still doing this, the therapy, the recovery, all of it. Tiffany, after what you just did up there, after the way you stood up for yourself, and for what we're building together, you think I'm going anywhere? She leaned forward until their foreheads nearly touched. What if it doesn't work? What if the progress stops and I never get any better than I am right now? Then we'll have spent whatever time we have together fighting for something beautiful. His voice was soft but certain. Besides, I made you a promise about that waltz. I don't break promises. That evening, they worked on her legs with a new intensity, both of them understanding that everything had changed. The secret was out, the world was watching, and every session now carried the weight of public scrutiny along with private hope. but the sensations were stronger than ever, spreading through her legs like electricity. When Caleb asked her to try standing with support, she gripped the parallel bars they'd installed and felt her feet take weight for the first time in 18 months. "Oh my God," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm standing. I'm actually standing." "You're standing," he confirmed, his own voice thick with emotion. "How does it feel?" "Terrifying. Wonderful. Like coming home." She managed to hold the position for nearly a minute, before her legs began to shake and she had to sit back down. But it was enough. It was a beginning. "Tomorrow we try a step," Caleb said, as he helped her back into her wheelchair. "Just one, just one." He smiled, and she saw in his expression the same wonder she felt. "But it's going to be the most important step either of us has ever taken." As they parted ways that night, Tiffany's phone was already buzzing with messages from reporters who'd gotten word about her standing. The stock had recovered its losses and was climbing higher. The board was asking for an emergency celebration meeting instead of a crisis management session. But all of that felt secondary to the sensation still tingling through her legs, the muscle memory of what it felt like to bear her own weight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new scrutiny, new opportunities for both triumph and failure. Tonight, though, she would dream about taking that first step, and about the man who'd never stopped believing she could. The first step came on a Thursday. Not the tentative shuffle Tiffany had expected, but a genuine, deliberate movement forward, her right foot lifting and placing itself 6 inches ahead of where it had been. The parallel bars trembled under her white-knuckled grip, her entire body shaking with the effort. But she had moved under her own power for the first time in 18 months. "Again!" she gasped, sweat beading on her forehead, despite the cool air conditioning. "Easy," Caleb cautioned, his hands hovering near her waist, ready to catch her if she fell. "We don't want to push too hard." "Again," she repeated more forcefully this time. The second step was harder, her left leg reluctant to remember its purpose. But with Caleb's quiet encouragement and her own fierce determination, it too moved forward, carrying her another precious few inches toward what had once seemed impossible. "That's 2, he said, and she could hear the wonder in his voice. 2 perfect steps. "Sarah took 3, she said, thinking of his wife's final journey to Emma's bedroom. "Sarah took 3, he agreed quietly. "But her story isn't your story, Tiffany. Yours is just beginning." Over the following weeks, the steps came easier and more frequently. 3 became 5, 5 became 10, 10 became the length of the conference room. The parallel bars gave way to a walker, then to forearm crutches, then to nothing but her own stubborn will and the steady presence of the man who'd never stopped believing in miracles. The media attention was relentless, but had shifted from scandal to inspiration. Ward Industries' stock soared as investors realized they had a CEO who didn't just manage crisis but transformed impossibility into triumph. The board meetings that had once felt like battles became celebrations of not just her recovery, but the company's strongest quarter in 5 years. But it was the quiet moments that meant the most. Caleb's hand on her back as she practiced walking down the hallway, the tears in his eyes when she made it to the elevator under her own power, the way he said her name like a prayer each time she achieved something new. "I have a confession," she told him one evening, as they worked on her balance exercises. She'd been walking unassisted for 2 weeks now, though still with the careful, measured gait of someone relearning how to trust her own body. "What's that?" "I've been practicing at home." She looked almost guilty as she admitted it. "Late at night, when I can't sleep, I've been walking around my penthouse. Yesterday, I made it all the way to the kitchen and back without holding on to anything." Caleb's smile was radiant. How did it feel? Like freedom. The word came out soft and wondering. Like being myself again, but better somehow. Stronger. You are stronger. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Even stronger than Sarah. He considered this, his expression growing thoughtful. Sarah's strength was in her acceptance, her grace in the face of something she couldn't control. Yours is in your refusal to accept limitations. Different kinds of strength, but equally beautiful. That night, as he packed up the equipment they barely needed anymore, Caleb seemed unusually quiet. When Tiffany asked what was wrong, he turned to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. We should probably start thinking about ending these sessions, he said carefully. You're walking independently now. You don't need me anymore. The words hit her like a physical blow. In all her focus on recovery, on proving her strength to the world and to herself, she hadn't considered that success might mean losing the man who'd made it possible. I'll always need you, she said, without thinking, then felt her cheeks burn at the admission. Tiffany. No, let me finish. She took a breath, steadying herself both physically and emotionally. These past 2 months have been about more than just learning to walk again. They've been about learning to live again, to hope again, to trust someone else with the broken parts of me. You were never broken, he said softly. You were just paused. Maybe. But you were the one who hit play again. She moved closer to him, no longer needing her wheelchair, no longer defined by her limitations. I know this complicates everything. I know you have Emma to think about, and a life that doesn't include complicated billionaire heiresses. But I also know that what's happened between us is real. Caleb's hands found hers, his thumbs tracing across her knuckles, in a gesture that had become as familiar as breathing. It scares me how real it is. Why? Because I've already lost one person I loved. Because Emma's already been through losing her mother, and I don't know if I can ask her to risk caring about someone else who might not stay. The pain in his voice made her chest tight with understanding. What if I promised to stay? People make promises they can't keep. I don't. She looked directly into his eyes, letting him see everything she felt. When I make a promise, Caleb Morgan, I keep it. Ask anyone who's ever done business with me. This isn't business. No, she agreed. It's infinitely more important than business. For a long moment they stood in the conference room that had become their sanctuary, hands linked, hearts open, balanced on the edge of something that could change both their lives forever. There's something I need to tell you, he said finally. About Emma. Tiffany felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. What about her? She knows about you. Not the details, but she knows I've been helping someone special. She asks about you every night, whether you're getting better, whether you're happy, whether you might want to meet her someday. The image of a 7-year-old girl worrying about a stranger's happiness nearly undid Tiffany completely. She sounds amazing. She is. And she's been through enough loss for one childhood. If we do this, if we try to be whatever we're becoming, it affects her too. I need to know you understand that. I understand that any man who puts his daughter's emotional well-being first is exactly the kind of man worth risking everything for, Tiffany said quietly. I understand that I've spent most of my adult life believing I wasn't meant for family, for the messy complications of loving people who need you to show up every day. But these past 2 months with you have made me wonder if maybe I was just waiting for the right family to show up. Something shifted in Caleb's expression, hope battling caution in his storm-gray eyes. Tiffany, I want to meet her, she said before she could lose her nerve. I want to meet Emma and take her for ice cream and hear about her dreams of medical school. I want to prove to both of you that when I commit to something to someone, I don't walk away." The wordplay wasn't lost on either of them, and despite the seriousness of the moment, Caleb's mouth quirked into a smile. "That was terrible," he said, "but accurate." "Yeah," he admitted, "accurate." They met Emma the following Saturday in Central Park at the playground near the Alice in Wonderland statue. Tiffany had agonized over what to wear, finally settling on jeans and a simple sweater that she hoped struck the right balance between approachable and put together. She arrived early, walking the winding paths with a freedom she was still getting used to, her steps steady and sure after months of careful practice. When she saw them approaching Caleb with his familiar easy stride and a small girl with dark curls and her father's eyes, her heart did something complicated in her chest. Emma was beautiful in the unconscious way of children, all gangly limbs and bright curiosity, a backpack covered in dinosaur patches bouncing against her shoulders. "Emma," Caleb said as they drew near, "I'd like you to meet Tiffany, the lady I told you about." Emma looked up at her with frank assessment, taking in everything from Tiffany's nervous smile to her designer sneakers. "Daddy said you were sick, but you're getting better." "That's right." Tiffany knelt down to Emma's eye level, a movement that still felt miraculous after so many months of being confined to her wheelchair. "Your daddy helped me learn how to walk again, like the physical therapists helped Mommy." The direct question caught Tiffany off guard, but she saw Caleb nod encouragingly from behind his daughter. "Yes, but different. Your daddy has very special hands that know how to wake up parts of your body that have been sleeping." Emma's eyes widened with interest. "Like magic. Exactly like magic. Can I see you walk?" The request was so innocent, so free of the complicated emotions that surrounded Tiffany's recovery that it made her laugh. "Would you like to race me to the swings?" Emma's face lit up with delight. "You'll lose, I'm very fast." "We'll see about that." What followed was the most joyful competition of Tiffany's life, a 7-year-old girl running with the boundless energy of childhood, while a woman in her late 20s walked as quickly as her still recovering legs would allow, both of them laughing as they reached the swing set at roughly the same time. "You're faster than I thought," Emma announced with approval. "But I still won." "You absolutely did." As Caleb pushed Emma on the swing, she peppered Tiffany with questions about her job, her apartment, whether she liked dinosaurs, yes, whether she could make pancakes, she'd learn, and whether she planned to stick around. That last question came with the devastating directness of a child who'd learned early that the adults in her life sometimes disappeared without warning. "I hope so," Tiffany said honestly. "If you and your daddy will let me." "I think you're nice," Emma declared, "and Daddy smiles more when he talks about you." Over ice cream afterward, chocolate chip for Emma, vanilla for Caleb, and strawberry for Tiffany, the conversation turned to Emma's school project on heroes. "I was going to write about doctors because they help people," Emma explained, chocolate chip ice cream decorating her chin. "But now I think I might write about people who help doctors remember how to help people." "That's very philosophical for a 7-year-old, Tiffany observed. "She gets it from her mother," Caleb said quietly. "Sarah always saw the deeper connections in things." "Tell me about her," Tiffany said, surprising both of them. "About your mommy." Emma's face grew serious but not sad. She was the most beautiful person in the whole world. She had long brown hair that smelled like flowers, and she could sing any song just by hearing it once. When she got sick, she couldn't walk anymore, but she still sang to me every night. "She sounds wonderful." She was, but she's in heaven now, and Daddy says she would want us to be happy. "Do you make Daddy happy?" The question hung in the air between them, simple and complex all at once. Tiffany looked at Caleb, seeing in his expression the same vulnerability she felt. "I hope so," she said finally. "He makes me very happy." "Good," Emma said with satisfaction. "Then maybe she won't be worried about us anymore." That evening, after they'd walked Emma home to their apartment in Queens, a cozy two-bedroom place filled with photographs of Sarah and Emma's artwork, and the lingering warmth of a home built on love, and Caleb invited Tiffany to stay for dinner. "Nothing fancy," he warned. "Mac and cheese from a box and whatever vegetables I can convince Emma to eat." Sounds perfect. It was perfect in ways that had nothing to do with culinary excellence and everything to do with the easy domesticity of it. Emma helped set the table, chattering about her friend Madison's pet hamster. Caleb cooked with the efficient movements of a man accustomed to single parenthood. And Tiffany found herself folding napkins and feeling more at home than she had in her $1 million penthouse. After dinner, Emma showed Tiffany her room, an explosion of pink and purple, with a bookshelf full of picture books about dinosaurs and princesses in equal measure. On her nightstand sat a photograph of a woman with kind eyes and Emma's smile. "That's Mommy," Emma said, following Tiffany's gaze. "I tell her about my day every night before I go to sleep." "What will you tell her tonight?" Emma considered this seriously. "That I met you, and that you're nice, and that maybe it's okay for Daddy to love someone else now." The simple acceptance in the child's voice nearly brought Tiffany to tears. "Do you think your mommy would be okay with that?" "Mommy always said that love isn't like pizza." "What does that mean?" "With pizza, if you give someone else a slice, you have less pizza. But with love, if you give someone else some love, you just have more love." Emma's explanation was delivered with the matter-of-fact wisdom of someone who'd never doubted this fundamental truth. "So if Daddy loves you too, it doesn't mean he loves Mommy less. It just means our family has more love." Later, after Emma was tucked into bed with her customary story and lullaby, Tiffany and Caleb sat on his small balcony overlooking the modest neighborhood street. The contrast to her penthouse view couldn't have been starker, but somehow this felt more real, more grounded. "She's extraordinary," Tiffany said. "She is. And she likes you, which is—" He paused, searching for words. "She's never warmed up to anyone this quickly. Not since Sarah died. Maybe she knows something we're still figuring out. Maybe." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining with familiar ease. "Tiffany, what happens now? With us, with this?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching the street lamps flicker to life as darkness settled over Queens. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never done this before, the family thing, the falling in love with someone who comes with complicated history and a 7-year-old who thinks love is infinite." "Are you falling in love?" The question she'd been avoiding crystallized in the space between them. "Yeah," she said softly. "Yeah, I think I am. Terrifyingly, completely, irrevocably in love with both of you." "Good," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Because Emma's already planning your next visit, and I'm already planning how to fit a queen-size bed in my bedroom." "Caleb Morgan, are you inviting me to move in?" "I'm inviting you to consider what forever might look like with a janitor and his daughter." Forever. The word should have terrified her, she who'd built her life around independence and self-sufficiency. Instead, it felt like coming home. "It looks like Saturday morning pancakes and homework help, and learning how to braid hair," she said. "It looks like teaching Emma about business and learning from her about love being infinite. It looks like growing old with someone who saw me at my most broken and never stopped believing I could be whole." "And dancing," he reminded her. "You still owe me a waltz." 6 months later, Ward Industries hosted its annual charity gala, a black tie affair that drew Manhattan's elite to raise money for spinal cord research. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and designer gowns, but all eyes were on the woman who stood at the podium without assistance, her speech about hope and recovery bringing many to tears. 18 months ago, Tiffany said into the microphone, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed room, I believed my story was over. I thought I was broken beyond repair, that the best I could hope for was to manage my limitations gracefully. She paused, her gaze finding Caleb in the crowd, handsome in his rented tuxedo, Emma beside him in a purple dress that made her feel like a princess. I was wrong. My story wasn't over, it was just beginning its best chapter. The applause was thunderous, but Tiffany barely heard it. All her attention was focused on making her way down from the podium and across the ballroom floor to where her family waited. When the orchestra began to play a slow waltz that seemed to fill the room with magic, Caleb stepped forward and offered his hand. I believe you promised me this dance, he said. I always keep my promises. As they moved onto the dance floor, Tiffany felt the same sensation she'd experienced years ago at another gala in another lifetime, the feeling of floating, of being weightless and grounded all at once. But this time was different. This time she wasn't dancing with a family friend out of social obligation. She was dancing with the man she loved, the man who'd given her back not just the use of her legs, but the courage to use her heart. Around them, other couples began to join the dance, but Tiffany was only aware of Caleb's strong arms holding her steady, his gray eyes reflecting the light of the chandeliers, the soft music that seemed to have been written just for this moment. How does it feel? He murmured as they turned in slow circles. Like flying, she whispered back. Like coming home. Like the beginning of everything. Good, he said, spinning her gently before pulling her back into his arms. Because I have something to ask you. Here now, in front of 500 people. Here now, in front of 500 people, and one very important 7-year-old who helped me pick out the ring. Tiffany's breath caught as understanding dawned. Through the crowd of dancers, she could see Emma standing with Margaret, both of them watching with knowing smiles. Caleb. Tiffany Ward, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion she could see in his eyes. You taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone worth fighting for, worth growing with, worth building a life beside. The music seemed to swell around them as he continued. Will you marry us, Emma and me? Will you let us love you for the rest of your life? The tears came without warning, streaming down her face as she looked at this man who'd seen her at her most vulnerable and loved her anyway, who'd taught her that strength wasn't about never falling down, but about choosing to get back up, who'd shown her that sometimes the most impossible promises were the ones most worth keeping. Yes, she said loud enough for the people around them to hear, loud enough for Emma to hear from across the room. Yes to all of it. To Saturday pancakes and bedtime stories and teaching a little girl about infinite love. Yes to growing old with the man who gave me back my life. Yes to dancing with you forever. The ballroom erupted in applause as Caleb kissed her there on the dance floor, but Tiffany was only dimly aware of the celebration around them. All her attention was focused on the feeling of being exactly where she belonged, in the arms of the man she loved, surrounded by a community that had watched her fall and rise again. Stepping into a future that held more possibility than she'd ever dared to imagine. When Emma broke free from Margaret's grip and ran onto the dance floor to hug them both, Tiffany's heart felt so full she thought it might burst. This was what she'd been walking toward all along, not just the ability to move her legs again, but the courage to move her heart forward into something beautiful and complicated and infinitely worth the risk. As the three of them swayed together to the music, Tiffany thought about Sarah, the woman she'd never met, but whose love had made this family possible. She liked to think Sarah was watching somewhere, proud of her husband's courage to love again, and her daughter's wisdom in understanding that hearts like families could expand infinitely to hold all the love they were offered. The dance ended, but the music seemed to continue in Tiffany's heart as they made their way through the congratulating crowd. Tomorrow would bring the practical considerations of merger, combining her penthouse life with their queen's apartment, learning to navigate the complexities of instant motherhood, figuring out how to blend a billionaire's resources with a janitor's values. But tonight was for celebration, for dancing, for the miracle of second chances, and the magic of love that multiplied rather than divided. Tonight was for the family they'd chosen to become, built not on the foundation of what they'd lost, but on the promise of everything they'd found. As Caleb helped her into her coat at the end of the evening, his wedding ring catching the light of the hotel's lobby chandelier, Tiffany realized that her father had been right all those years ago. She was stronger than she'd known, strong enough to survive tragedy, strong enough to risk love again, strong enough to build a life that honored both her past and her future. Walking out into the Manhattan night with her husband and daughter, Tiffany Ward Morgan felt the cold air on her face and the solid ground beneath her feet, and the infinite possibility of tomorrow spreading out before them like a dance floor waiting to be filled with music. She had learned to walk again, yes, but more importantly, she had learned to dance with life, with love, with the beautiful uncertainty of a future written not in boardrooms or hospital beds, but in the space between heartbeats, in the trust between partners, in the endless courage to keep moving forward together. And as they disappeared into the city that had witnessed both her fall and her rise, the story of the paralyzed billionaire and the janitor who taught her to dream again became legend proof that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with the simplest act of faith, the willingness to let someone else believe in your healing until you can believe in it yourself. The dance they had learned never really ends. It just finds new music, new steps, new reasons to keep moving in time with the rhythm of hope itself.